This is Dan Schneider. On this Dan Schneider video interview, I'm starting a new series called Why This TV Show is Great. First up is the 1960s classic sitcom F Troop. I am speaking with Hal Horn, who runs a blog about television, and we will be talking about why F Troop is great. This is the beginning of a new series based on my movie series, Why This Film is Great. It's going to be called Why This TV Show is Great. Hal Horn is my guest. He runs a blog about television, classic television, and we will be talking about F Troop. So Hal, before I do, I'd like to give my guests a few minutes to introduce themselves. If you would, give a little background about who you are, what your blog is about, and some opening shots about F Troop.
Okay, well, I am Hal Horn, and since 2006, I've had the Horn section. It's at hornsection.blogspot.com if anyone wants to check it out.
And I'll link to it. I'll link to it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and I started out doing obscure films mostly, but television has always been a component of what I review. But I started out with films that had never been released to DVD or in some cases VHS either. Did over 100 of those starting that, and then switched over to classic television. I tend to do overlooked, neglected older shows, and F Troop is my favorite show of all time. But I also have an ongoing episode guide for Love That Bob, also known as the Bob Cummings Show, which has become very hard to see in the last couple of decades. Maverick, which of course is pretty easily available, is another show I've been doing a guide to, and Hondo, which is on Get TV now, only 17 episodes. It's about as overlooked as you can get. And Get Christy Love or some of the other shows that I cover, but it's not limited to just those.
Yeah. I know in the last few years, the last 5, 6, 7 years, there have been a lot of what I guess they call secondary channels. Like if you have ABC on the main channel, like here, for example, in the Austin area, ABC is on channel 24. Then they'll have 24.1, 0.2, 0.3, etc. And they'll have these other classic channels where you can see Mary Tyler Moore. There's all Western channels. There's a channel called Buzzer for all game shows, kind of thing. Do you think that has had a good impact on people like you for your blogs?
I think it has. I mean, it certainly has made things easier to find. F Troop has never really been out of circulation, but there was quite a spike in readership, I noticed, when MeTV originally picked it up about 7 or 8 years ago. And then Circle TV was airing it twice a day very recently. And both of those are readily available on Dish Network and on these alternate channels like you mentioned. Yeah, it certainly has created new interest in a lot of these older shows, which is a good thing.
Yeah, because a lot of classic television suffers from having been erased. A lot of the live stuff. I've always argued that for me, the real golden age of television, I actually did a show about this a couple of hundred shows ago, wasn't the 1950s, and it's certainly not now, but really I'd say from the mid 60s through about 1980, because you had the high concept sitcoms like an F Troop, like the Munsters, like Batman, like the Monkees. And then you sort of shifted to the All in the Families, the socially conscious shows, All in the Family, Barney Miller, Mary Tyler Moore, these more modern shows. And then for me, around 1980, everything really just started getting repetitive. What do you consider the golden age of television?
I think the mid 60s is a really good jumping off point for that also. As you mentioned, many high concept shows. F Troop had one of the more contrived setups, but not in a bad way. And then you move into the 70s, and they were looking for portrayal of more realism with All in the Family and all of its various spinoffs. Sanford and Son is probably my favorite from that era,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of good choices. And I agree with you. The early 80s is at about that point where the sitcoms really started. I can't think of any great examples of new ones in that decade until maybe Cosby came around in '84, but then very quickly, just there were so many copies of it that.
Yeah. So for those people who don't know what F Troop was, and it's probably not, I think, as famous as Batman or the Monkees or even the Munsters and the Addams Family from that era. Uh, let's talk about what it was about. If you could give a minute or two about what it was about, the whole setup. We talked about high concept, which is stuff that is out of the, really weird. 7 people stranded on an island. A woman dies and comes back as a car, kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the one sentence description was Sergeant Bilko in the Old West.
Yeah.
For F Troop, and to me, in some ways, it's obviously not as highly regarded as the original Bilko, but I think in some ways it did Bilko one better. That was a show dominated by its lead actor and lead personality, absolutely a one-of-a-kind talent with terrific writing from Nat Hiken, the first 2 seasons. But with F Troop, actually seemed a little edgier to me in ways. Sergeant Bilko never succeeded, but we saw O'Rourke and Agarn counting their ill-gotten gains rather frequently, which was not something that you normally saw on mid-60s TV. They had a henchman for him, as it were, in Corporal Agarn, who was far more memorable than anyone that any of Bilko's corporals or underlings. And the commanding officer that Sergeant O'Rourke, the Bilko of F Troop, the commanding officer was someone you could do a lot with. Ken Berry, with his various talents, trained dancer, very good at the physical comedy. That was something you did not get out of Paul Ford on the old Bilko show. And also very adept at playing the clueless commander, every bit as well. Kind of a progressive show in that Wrangler Jane is a very positive female character for the time. Self-sufficient, arguably the best business person outside of O'Rourke in the entire show. And just, in general, a very self-sufficient, positive female character. The Hickowies were O'Rourke's business partners in this setup, and they were basically carbon copies of the soldiers at F Troop, only, just on the opposite side. O'Rourke and Agarn were shifty, sneaky, double-dealing. So was Wild Eagle and his henchman, Crazy Cat. And neither the F Troopers nor the Hickowies were looking for any conflict whatsoever. Peaceful coexistence was the order of the day. Peace and prosperity for all. And occasionally the U.S. Army, the bad guys, as it were, would come in to interfere with this peaceful coexistence. A little bit daring for 1965 to make the U.S. Army the bad guys, as it were.
Well, the proper U.S. Army, certainly the troopers at F Troop.
The proper one.
But
F Troop was mainly the dumping ground for soldiers that they would just rather not have in the cavalry at all.
Right.
Now, I mentioned the contrived setup that brings you here. Um, Wilton Parmenter is a private in the closing days of the Civil War. His entire family is distinguished colonels, generals. They have names like Thor and
Yeah.
Jupiter. And Private Wilton Parmenter is in charge of officers' laundry. On his way to pick up General Grant's laundry, he sneezes. It sounds like charge. A bunch of soldiers follow him, and this ends up deciding the battle. It's the decisive battle in the Civil War. It's at Appomattox, where he's stationed at
Yeah.
the time. So he gets commissioned.
And it's in
Also,
the
yeah,
theme song from season 1. You know, the
yes,
end
yeah,
of the Civil War was near when quite
yes,
accidentally. Do-do-do. Yeah.
yes, like Gilligan's Island,
Yeah.
they describe it in the theme song.
Yeah.
And he also gets the Purple Heart. Didn't technically exist then,
Yeah.
but we'll take a little creative license because he gets
Yeah.
stuck with the medal he's receiving.
When pinning it on, some blood was shed.
Yes.
And so it was planned he command F Troop.
Yeah, they end up sending him to Fort Courage, where they've had three commanding officers in 18 months.
Yeah.
And he gets there, and we find out why. Sergeant O'Rourke, much like Sergeant Bilko in the earlier series, rules the roost. And he has basically run off the three officers before him, before Parmenter, because they were getting a little bit too close to the illegal dealings he was having with the Indians. And in Parmenter, they get the pigeon they've always dreamed of. He's completely clueless.
But he is the scourge of the West.
Oh, yeah, his reputation precedes him. He gets there, and they find out that, well, he's certainly not going to be the scourge of O'Rourke Enterprises. So for the ensuing episodes, O'Rourke and Agarn do everything they can to keep him in place, protect the image of the scourge of the West, so that he'll always be their commanding officer, and they'll never really have a threat to O'Rourke running the saloon, illegal. O'Rourke doing business with the Cowies and selling their souvenirs, also illegal.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got treason in every episode. That was a little bit daring. I mean, you couldn't picture, say, Bilko consorting with the Japanese during his World War II days.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is, Parmenter is such a stooge. They always call him the old man. The men would die for the old man. They love the old man. Even though Parmenter is probably younger than both Agarn. Well, certainly younger than O'Rourke, and probably younger than Agarn.
Yeah, and 30 years younger than Duffy, I'm sure, at least.
Yeah. And so you talked about how it was a bit progressive, but the funny thing too is there are two very interesting uses of the word fuck, or non-uses, because F Troop was pitched as fucked up, or the fuck up, and then the Cowies were originally supposed to be called the fuck Cowies or the Fuggowies, right? Because there's that funny scene where they said, we wandered many years from the East Coast or something, and we got lost, and then one of us said, where the heck are we? But originally it was whoops. We just had a little issue with Hal's transmission, but he's back. So we were talking about the Fuggowies. You said you had a good anecdote about that.
Yes. While I was working on some things, I actually probably do have enough material for a book on F Troop. Instead, I've just been releasing it in blog form. But I talked to the director of many first season episodes, Charles Rondeau, in 1989. I had sent him a script for a series that I was trying to see if someone was interested in, and actually got to talk with him on the phone. He did confirm for me, as the director of the pilot episode and among his output during the first season, that yes, they originally called it the Fuggowie tribe. And the censors said, no way. Made them change it, so they changed it to Hickowie. And Seaman Jacobs also, in his interview with the Television Institute and Academy, that should be available somewhere on YouTube,
Yeah.
confirms this as well. And he was the co-creator of the series and co-writer of many first season episodes with Ed James.
Yeah. So now I want to talk about the main characters and some of the best episodes, but I want to talk a little bit more about the background too. One of the things that people have complained about in years since is they've called the show racist. And as you mentioned earlier, the Indians were just as stupid as the white people. And I think one of the things is I think the show is actually a sort of meta commentary because they had mostly Jewish and Italian vaudeville stars, Borscht Belt kind of comics playing the Indians, which they often had, well, they almost always had non-Indians playing Indians in John Wayne films. And so there was a sort of a meta commentary because these Indians were clearly not, they weren't just, how. I mean, they had the occasional stiff-ass Indian chief that came from afar. But the Howie's were, I mean, they were basically like almost Jewish stereotypes. And they were mercenary. They just wanted the money. As you said, Wild Eagle was often trying to outcon O'Rourke. And I think you could say, well, maybe that humor was in good taste. But it clearly was saying that all human beings are idiots, basically.
Yes. And there's many asides. There's an episode where one of those hard-ass, basically the Native American version of the Inspector General shows up at the Hickory camp and orders them to attack somebody. And so in the ensuing attack, which first O'Rourke and Agarn try to train them to do battle with the Shugs, which is the hostile tribe during season 1. That failing, they decide to rig a battle so that they can get rid of the captain for a day, and the Hickories can impress the Inspector General by taking over Fort Courage. The setup for this is one of the best asides, I think, comments on this, in that they show up. You've got the almost blind Vanderbilt in the lookout tower. He of the 2900 vision. And Wild Eagle actually calls out to him, thinking he's in on the ruse. Hey, soldier, open up the gate. And Vanderbilt turns inside the fort and says, 3 o'clock and all is well. And Wild Eagle almost looks right at the camera and says, hard to believe, Indian always lose.
Well,
they're constantly referring to, as you mentioned, meta commentary.
Well,
so,
Vanderbilt is a great character because he, one time when some Indians get in, he says, I thought they were turkeys because he actually lets them in,
Yeah, that's an Iron Horse Go Home, which is another great meta commentary. In that particular episode, I believe they're skewering the whole Peter Minuet thing, Manhattan Island for $24, which they reference in the series more than once. And it's quite a scream watching Wild Eagle consistently outwit the army. In this particular case, as they try to relocate the tribe to appropriate the land for the railroad to come through.
Yeah, and oftentimes, like in Gilligan's Island, they often have what would now be called like steampunk inventions. I remember just seeing one episode a few weeks ago before it was taken off of Circle. They have a horse wash, not a car wash, but a horse wash set up. And, the whole idea of it is just so absurd and over the top, but it's another scheme for O'Rourke Enterprises.
Yeah, there's these constant inventions that are ahead of their time. In another, Medicine Man invents the great medicine man Roaring Chicken invents the Roar Chick test. with Barry Blunt while he's trying to diagnose someone. And in still another, we see Wrangler Jane's cousin invent the telephone about 15 years early, which he calls the talker box. We get a lot of great anachronisms and meta commentary through them.
Yeah, one of the things that I liked as a kid growing up, and liked a lot about a lot of the mid '60s comedies, was what I call the sort of balls to the wall devotion to humor. Anything for a joke. I mean, nothing was sacred. I mean, yes, you couldn't say fuck howies or fuck owies, but within that, if you look at Gilligan's Island, if you look at F Tube, if you look at a lot of the shows on that Get Smart, and that carries through. Comedy's got a bit less tame. One of my favorite comedies from the '80s, Night Court, is sort of a throwback to the 1960s with that balls to the wall kind of thing. Married with Children is another one that was very risque for its day. But do you think what do you think? What do you think precipitated that sort of just outlandish Batman monkeys, anything for a joke attitude of the mid '60s?
Well, there was a lot of baiting of the censors, which we touched on with the naming of the Hickowies, and F Troop was just one of the shows that did this constantly. They named Agarn's cousin Lucky Pierre, for example, in one second season episode, and I would see a lot of baiting of the censors. You mentioned Batman. There was one episode where Adam West, barely being able to keep a straight face, turned to Robin and said something he'd done was a signal of your oncoming thrust of manhood. And they were constantly trying to see what they could get away with the censors. And I think that was just one component of it, but you'll see it in all of these shows you mentioned. F Troop was, I think, just trying to be a little bit more risque than the others at times. There's a lot of censor baiting.
Well, my favorite one is when I forget. I forget. I think it's when Aegon, one of his cousins, maybe it's his Russian cousin, comes and something happens, and there's a scene where he's trying to date Wrangler Jane, and they're eating chicken, and they're and you see back and forth the faces of Aegon and Jane trying to out. I mean, the sexual imagery is just so obvious, but you wonder how that would pass.
Yeah, that now I've reviewed that episode at the section already.
Yeah.
I'm about halfway through the episode guide, going show by show. I'm not doing them in order.
Yeah.
But the courtship of Wrangler Jane, which you just referenced, that's one of the ones that I did a complete deconstruction of. Some of them I do 8-10 paragraph summaries of. Others I go all the way through the episode, the running commentary, and that's one of the less subtle ones. Yeah, I mean, they're practically having sex with this banquet on the captain's.
Let's go through the main 6 characters. We talked a little bit about Wilton Parmenter, played by Ken Berry. And I don't think Ken Berry was a big star before then. He later went on to Mayberry RFD. Then he, was on the Carol Burnett show playing, his main role was playing the son of the Mama's Family skit. Then that became a show for 2 or 3 years in, I think, the late '80s, early '90s. But my God, he was so agile. He was such a great physical comedian. The only comedian on television that immediately comes to mind as being his equal is maybe John Ritter. So what do you think about just the physical comedy that Berry did in so many episodes?
Well, they would design things for him that just about only he could do.
Okay, so how you're on your phone now because we're having some issues with the computer. So if you would, we're speaking about Ken Berry and his agility.
Yeah, there were actually bits that were written or devised for him. And Bye Bye Balloon, you get a very good one during the teaser where he's reading a letter, walking through town, and going up and down a teeter-totter, and um, almost running into several different things, even sliding, down another little area. A great bit of physical business, and the whole time he's reading this communication from headquarters and completely oblivious to about 5 or 6 near misses.
Mm.
There's also a similar one to that in Old Iron Pants during season 1, where that one is pretty amazing to me in that he is Captain Carmatter, who has been brainwashed by General Custer away at camp to try and be a hard ass. So he is a hard ass General Custer type who is still clumsy. Still going, just walking through narrowly, avoiding collisions and disasters, but this time with the bearing of a Custer type. Just some really good stuff, and they made great use of Ken Berry's talent for physical humor. He's also, I think, very underrated with the verbal humor as well.
Yeah. Well, there was one episode that I saw that I recall as a kid. I forget. It wasn't the guy who played Angel Eyes in the Man with No Name trilogy. It was another great character actor. He plays a bad guy, and he wants to have a shootout with Parmenter, and little boys get in the way, an old drunk gets in the way, ladies cross by, and then he convinces him, and Parmenter's like, well, I am the scourge of the West, and so I don't want to, and they end up they draw, and Parmenter misses him, of course, but he has a Rube Goldberg effect, and he drops the cage. I forget, what was the actor that?
That was Jack Elam
Jack
in
Elam,
Dirge
yeah.
for the Scourge, and
Yeah.
the shootout is to determine who's the Scourge of the West.
Yeah.
It's one of the first comedic roles that Jack Elam
Yeah.
was cast in, actually. He had been playing straightforward villains for most of his first decade or so as an actor. And in this particular episode, there's room for only one Scourge, and that's me. And that's what precipitates the need to have a shootout with Parmenter. And Parmenter disarms him a couple of times before that without realizing it. And he's just completely clueless to.
Yeah.
He just thinks Elam's character is the town drunk.
Yeah.
When he falls, he's like, Sergeant, do something about that, man.
So let's talk about Sergeant O'Rourke, because of course Forrest Tucker, I knew him as a kid from the show initially. I remember in the early 70s, he had a television show in the mornings with Larry Storch again, like The Real Ghostbusters. He was also with Bob Denver on Dusty's Trail, which I think had potential to be a good show, but it was canceled after one season. And then I know him from, of course, some classic 1950s sci-fi B films and some westerns. Probably the most notable one is The Abominable Snowman. But he is really good. He really had a comic. He was a great straight man, really a great straight man. Whereas when you look at like Gilligan and the Skipper, they're more sort of like Laurel and Hardy's. They could both be straight men or play off of each other. The Forrest Tucker, Larry Storch comic team is more sort of like Abbott and Costello. I mean, Forrest Tucker is definitely the Bud Abbott there. He's the straight man.
Yes, and he had lots of leading roles throughout the 50s. His breakthrough, I guess, was in Sands of Iwo Jima with John Wayne in 1949. Had a really good supporting part in a film that's come to be known as a classic. And he started getting leads in westerns after that, and leads in the science fiction films that you mentioned a little later in the decade. His comedic talents were not really explored until he appeared in Audie Main in 1958. And the director of that film, Morton DaCosta, chose him to star in the touring version of The Music Man as Professor Hill. And I think this was what led to him being considered for O'Rourke. He ended up playing the role of Professor Hill over 2,000 times, more times than Robert Preston did, even, which I guess a lot of people don't realize. But when they were casting F Troop, Corporal Agarn was not originally a character. It was going to be a more straightforward Bilko type show, with the O'Rourke character being Bilko and the Parmenter character being Colonel Hall, essentially. And Storch and Tucker were both up for the role of Sergeant O'Rourke. And Tucker seemed to be more appropriate for the role as conceived, but the producers thought they had something with the two of them together, so they created a new role so that Storch and Tucker could work together kind of as a comedy team. I mentioned one of the ways I think that F Troop did Bilko one better. I think having those two teamed up made for a lot of interesting setups that grew from that. And it just so turned out that Tucker and Storch were such a terrific team. They did a nightclub act for a time in 1967. The two of them, they were joined by Ken Berry, and then, as you mentioned, the Ghostbusters, and there were a few other TV episode and TV movie roles where they teamed up in the 70s as well.
And I want to talk about Larry Storch because recently Betty White died. She was just a few days, maybe a couple of weeks shy of being 100, but Larry Storch is not far behind. And I think he's the only surviving member of the main or secondary cast.
He is now, with the passing of James Hampton last year, who lived in Coppell, not too far from us here. Yes, Mr. Storch, who I had the pleasure of meeting him once in 2000 when he was here touring with Annie Get Your Gun. I got a picture with him and everything. It's somewhere on the horn section.
Well, I think he and Frank Gorshin were probably the two best impressionists and or comedians of the 1960s. Certainly, people don't realize that Storch was he was sort of Rich Little before Rich Little.
He really was. He does a dead on Edward Everett Horton in the 4th episode, and used a lot of different voices for this. You look at his IMDb credit list, it's just astounding how many voice roles Mr. Storch has had over the years. And yeah, he just turned 99 years old Saturday. And he was, oddly enough, it was Larry Storch who was nominated for an Emmy. No one else got an Emmy nomination on F Troop during its run. The Storch was nominated in 1967 and lost to Don Adams of Get Smart.
And the thing is, he plays a handful of characters, usually the cousins of Agarn, or relatives somehow. He's constantly bullying the privates, hitting them with his hats, and yet he's constantly crying, "Oh, Sarge!" And the most, to me, clearest reference to the comedy of, say, an Abbott and Costello is who says I'm dumb? Someone says something, and then 2 minutes later it occurs to him.
Yeah, and that running gag did not even come up until the second season, was it whoever came up with that idea? It was just brilliant. Yeah, there would be, he'd inadvertently give O'Rourke an idea. Agarn, I don't know why everyone says you're so dumb. And sometimes it would be several minutes later in the middle of a completely different scene. Oftentimes he would say it to him at the fort, and they'd have ridden to the Hickory camp, and then finally it dawns on him, who says I'm dumb? Just brilliant idea. And
of course the Hickory camp, this sort of exists in another. There's nothing. I think it's like take a right by the bear that looks like a rock, and then a left by the rock that looks like a bear, or whatever it is, and so we don't even know where F Troop is. Is it in Utah? Is it in Nevada? Is it in Arizona? Is it in California? We have no idea where it is, do we?
It's intentionally vague throughout the
Yeah.
run. I've heard Kansas mentioned, which might make sense because there's several references to the troopers traveling backstage over to Dodge City for the weekend in several episodes. But yeah, it's just somewhere in the West, but
Yeah.
we're never fully told where.
Now, the only female character was Melody Patterson, and she was underage, famously. She was she was 15, I guess, when she was cast. And from what I've read online, she apparently had an affair with Forrest Tucker on the set. Um, it's really interesting because she is such a fiery character. Um, uh, so, what is that true that she was cast when she was underage?
Well, one of those two is true. I have no evidence of her ever having an affair with Forrest Tucker.
Yeah.
Um, Not to say that Mr. Tucker didn't get around, but I don't think he did with her. He was recently married to his third wife, Marilyn Fisk, at the time. There's a series of interviews with her on YouTube.
I've seen them.
Search for, and she also did 3 appearances on the show during the run. But anyway, getting to the subject of Melody Patterson being underage, that is true. She was 15 when cast, and before it was discovered that she was actually 16 years old. She was born in April of 1949, so she was cast before her birthday, and they filmed the pilot and several episodes after that. Then it was discovered that she was only 16.
Yeah.
And what can you do? You've already filmed 7, 8 episodes. She's perfect for the part. So you will notice that there is a point where it changes. In the first few episodes, the kissing scenes between her and Wilton are quite a bit more aggressive than they would become after it was discovered that the actress is 16. And then it's kind of toned down quite a bit after that.
So the Hakawis, we talked about their supposed naming. The only 2 Hakawis that are in most of the episodes, I guess, are Chief Wild Eagle and then his sort of deputy, Crazy Cat, played by Frank DeCova and what was it, Don Diamond?
Don Diamond. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think DeCova was another one of those great stone-faced. He could say the most absurd thing, and then he'd come up with these sort of Confucius-like koans that Crazy Rabbit says this, blah blah blah, and it would be something that would be a total non sequitur that made no sense.
Yes, he was fantastic at delivering those. And he's another actor that his comedic talents were largely unexplored before this series. He was normally being cast, if not as Native Americans, as mafia types. And this is something that may surprise some people. Frank DeCova was actually under consideration for the role that Marlon Brando ended up playing in The Godfather.
Oh, wow.
You can wonder just how different that movie might have been. Things have been a little different. Originally, Roaring Chicken was going to be the secondary Hekawi, and he appears in 6 early episodes, played by Edward Everett Horton.
Yeah.
And Horton took a role on Broadway after that, and it was going to be a leave from the series. They had 2 episodes already written that they were going to use Roaring Chicken in. They cast J. Pat O'Malley as an unnamed medicine man for those 2 episodes early on.
Wasn't he from Petticoat Junction? J. Pat O'Malley?
He's one of those character actors who was just everywhere back then. I can't Offhand, I can't
No,
remember
okay.
a specific series. He may have guessed it on Petticoat Junction, but um, anyway, Don Diamond had already appeared in a handful of episodes, sometimes as an unnamed Hickory, a couple of times referenced as Crazy Cat. And with the departure of Edward Everett Horton in the episodes beginning around the halfway point of the first season, Crazy Cat starts to take more prominence.
Mm.
And that turned out to be a lucky break. It was just the chemistry between Diamond and Dakova was fantastic. And you could pretty much make Crazy Cat into an Agarn type. Roaring Chicken being elderly was a different type of character, but Crazy Cat could then be always wishing to supplant the chief and being the second in command. Occasionally, he gets a promotion when the chief is temporarily detained, and he's just as inept as Agarn is at being the actual president. Some guys are vice president for a reason.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the secondary troopers. The most well-known one, and probably he was in the most episodes, had the most screen time, was the Hannibal Dobbs character played by James Hampton, and he famously was the bugler who couldn't. He could only play like one or two melodies.
Yeah, he was. It's astounding how he was inept on the bugle, but he plays the bagpipes pretty competently in one episode where they're looking for alternatives. Um, he plays the drums in a couple of episodes and does just fine with that. He seems to be able to play other instruments. He just can't hit a note on the bugle.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we do find out in one episode where they're seeking to replace him that, yes, he actually is the best they have. Everybody else is even worse.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing too. He's sort of Aegon's favorite target to pick on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they kind of play up that rivalry a bit more in season 2. But in the first season, there is one episode where Sergeant O'Rourke gets an unwanted promotion,
Yeah.
which makes Dobbs the corporal and Agarn the sergeant temporarily.
Uh-huh.
The status quo, of course, is reestablished at the episode's end, as it always would be. But yeah, that was kind of the first episode where we see that rivalry start to formate in season 2.
So
It's really played up.
So one of the other running gags, and it's even in the opening credits of the first season, is that the cannon doesn't work. You kick it, the I think it's the right side falls, and then it knocks over the lookout tower again. And usually in the lookout tower we see Trooper Vanderbilt. Now I had read somewhere years ago, and maybe you could clear that up. And he's played by Joe Brooks. He's the blind, roly-poly fat guy who has all these non sequiturs. But I had read that Vanderbilt was actually based on an infamously bad real soldier back then. Is that so? Do you know anything about that? Or is that just one of those rumors you hear?
I've read that too. I know that there was some basis in reality on some of these. Like there really was a 12-year-old boy that joined the cavalry in the 1860s,
Yeah.
and they based the second season episode
Yeah.
on this real occurrence. I don't have confirmation on that. I have heard that same rumor, but that's one of the things that I've researched and have not come up with anything one way or the other on. I'll be sure to put it on the blog whenever I do. I start. I have a number of categories I have for each episode, and I actually started to thought about doing a lookout tower scorecard, just a running count on whether it went down this episode or not, but decided against it. Oh well, maybe I can do a whole post on that Sunday and run the numbers.
So the other trooper that has a good deal of speaking lines is Bob Steele's Trooper Duffy. Now Bob Steele, I have seen him in other Hollywood westerns, and he's of course the only survivor of the Alamo is his claim to fame. Uh, but the character seemed. I seem to recall. Isn't there one episode where it's shown that he wasn't at the Alamo or something like that, where people call into question his tale? Am I mistaken?
About that part of it, that's true. He is confirmed to have been wounded there, but the service records show him as dead in one episode, and that may be the one that you're recalling. You mentioned that he had a speaking part in almost every episode. That was at the insistence of Forrest Tucker. Bob Steele had been a pretty big Western star in the 1930s in his younger days. He was known as Battling Bob. He was about 5'4", so he was a very small guy compared to other Western stars of the time, like John Wayne or Rod Cameron, who were maybe a foot taller than him. And he, as he aged, of course, he went into character parts and basically took whatever he could get. He was actually uncredited on a couple of episodes of Maverick in the supporting cast. And so Forrest Tucker pretty much insisted on Bob Steele having lines in every episode for salary purposes, and pretty much was looking after him. They were old friends. It went way back, and Tucker was known as someone who, would take care of his friends. And that this was one case of that. It was one reason he was cast in the first place, and he always insisted on Duffy having a speaking part.
Let's talk about a few of the guest stars. One of my favorite ones, I think, was the second season opener with Paul Lynde, who plays a Mountie. And then there's also the burglar of Ben.
Yes, that's a Larry Storch dual role. And they pulled out all the stops.
But Paul Lynde was in that episode, right?
Yes.
He's the singing Mountie.
Yeah, the singing Mountie, or not, but he was definitely the singing Mountie for most of the episode. And Storch had a dual role. It was quite a show-off episode, and it's no wonder that it was the opener of the second color season. So,
yeah, and you mentioned that. So the show did go to color, and in the second season, it was black and white in the first. I've heard that one of the reasons the show was canceled was not because it wasn't doing good in the ratings, and it was one of the best reviewed shows when it debuted, but that I guess the people, was it on ABC, didn't want to pay for a half-hour color television show.
I went into a lot of detail at the blog on one of my posts on the cancellation. ABC did not cancel F Troop. There was an awful lot of, as you know, with all Warner Brothers television, going back to their biggest successes in the 50s, it seemed like there was always backstage drama. It's part of what killed Maverick prematurely, with the loss of Roy Huggins and then James Garner. Of course, Clint Walker was off Cheyenne for an extended period in salary dispute. And Ed Burns was off 77 Sunset Strip for a long time for a salary dispute as well. With F Troop, it was mainly just fighting behind the scenes. Its biggest champion, William T. Orr, Jack Warner's son-in-law, had fallen out of favor with his father-in-law, and he was actually removed from Warner Brothers Television halfway through the first season. And I think he and his wife were eventually divorced. This may have had something to do with that. But gaining prominence at Warner Brothers with the ouster of Orr was a New York vice president named Ben Kalmanson. And he wanted out of television altogether. By 1966-67, F Troop was the only show being filmed on Warner Brothers backlot. The only other thing they had on TV by that time, they introduced no new series in 66, 67. The FBI was partly a Warner Brothers product, but it was a co-production with Quinn Martin and was not filmed on the Warner set. So F Troop was still doing very well in ratings. They had a 31 share. They were 40th out of 113 shows in 1966-67. There was no drop off from its lead in Batman, which ranked 37th. And the ratings went down for ABC later in the night after F Troop. A similar thing happened during the first season. The lead in was McHale's Navy. F Troop improved on McHale's numbers, and that was a long running hit. And then Peyton Place, which followed F Troop, lost a little bit of F Troop's numbers on Tuesday night. So it was never a ratings issue, and ABC certainly wanted it back. In both seasons, F Troop was the second highest rated sitcom on ABC behind Bewitched. But F Troop's own studio was trying to kill it, in particular, Ben Kalmanson. And so you go back and you look in January and February, they're talking about the upcoming 1967-68 season. F Troop is planned for ABC's schedule just about everywhere you look. And you see that they're likely going to move it to Wednesday nights because they were promising that time slot at 8 o'clock Eastern on Thursdays to the Flying Nun. And then ABC, next thing you know, the schedule was announced April 3rd that year, and ABC took about 3 weeks longer than the other networks. They were scrambling at the last minute to fill it out. And then it's announced, and F Troop isn't on it, which, really makes little sense in context. It was the next show to be canceled on the ratings list that year was Gilligan's Island, way down at number 49. The Fugitive was number 50, and its producers ended it. And, of course, Gilligan was only canceled because they were looking to move Gunsmoke, and, that was on a much higher rated network. So, the cancellation took place. The studio killed it. And then you saw a series of articles coming out of New York saying F Troop became too expensive to produce. It's a New York AP article. That's a dead giveaway that it's Kalmanson who's the origin of those stories. William T. Orr was interviewed for a book called The Box years later, and he did say, we were over budget, or they were over budget during season 2 by $3,000. Less than $100 an episode was the budget deficit. So really just a terrible decision. You have 65 episodes. If it runs one more year, it probably is more attractive in syndication with close to 100.
The interesting thing is so many of the most memorable television shows, especially these high concept sitcoms from the 60s, only lasted 2-3 years tops. Gilligan's Island was 3 years. Monkeys was 2 years. Batman was 2 years. F Troop was 2 years. Just off the top of my head, I think maybe Get Smart, Bewitched, both Addams Family. Well, they were longer on Addams Family, and Munsters were only 2 years. I think Get Smart ran 5 or 6. Bewitched maybe 7 or 8.
54, and the Monkeys ran 2 years apiece also.
Yeah, so it just seems, it makes you wonder if they had only gone a couple of more seasons with some of these shows. Because, if you look at the shows that ran the longest, especially, these are shows that really defined the 60s, that whole high concept thing. And yet they really were just very fleeting. Is there anything other than, say, some of this bureaucratic nonsense that you mentioned about F Troop or Gilligan's Island famously being canceled that explains why some of these really memorable shows were dumpstered after such a brief time on air?
Now, studio politics always mean a lot. I think another thing is at that particular time, they didn't they really didn't have the 100 episode target for syndication just yet. Um, that was still something that would just be a few years later. It would be noted at how desirable it was to have that magic number of episodes, and they didn't consciously look for that. It was the Munsters got canceled mainly because Batman appeared and bludgeoned it in the second half of its second season. It ranked number 34 at the halfway point of that season. By season's end, it ranked number 61. I mean, Batman just devastated it, and CBS, which had more options than ABC, obviously canceled it. The Addams Family in its second season fell victim to Hogan's Heroes at the same time slot. And that was it. Just a lot of the time, if they would see a notable drop in the ratings, they weren't really thinking about, well, we're not that far from 100 episodes at that time. They were just like, oh, well, I think, we're in an irreversible decline. Let's get something else in there. Even Gilligan's Island, still ranking well at number 49 in its final season, took a tumble from number 22 the season before that and lost some audience in its new time slot to the Monkees. But F Troop's kind of an odd case in that it ranked number 38 in its first season and number 40 in its second, and it had a higher share in its second season, a lower ranking because it aired earlier in the evening. There was no drop off whatsoever from season 1 to season 2, and that makes it probably the oddest case, but it's purely because its studio killed it.
Now, you mentioned Bilko and even, I guess you could say, McHale's Navy. I guess they preceded it. You mentioned Hogan's Heroes. Did that air? That came on the same season as F Troop?
Yeah, and similar concept. I mean, both of them kind of descendants of Bilko and a bit edgy. But
instead of the cowards, you had the Nazis as idiots.
Yeah, and Hogan's Heroes did premiere that same season, and it's a good example. That was a top 10 show. It rated higher than F Troop, but more importantly, it had a lot of support from its studio and network, and that's why it ran 6 years. The ratings became a bit more marginal on Hogan's Heroes in years 4 and 5, but it had quite a bit more support behind the scenes.
So I digressed a little bit about sort of the politics and the schedule of the show. Let's talk. I mentioned the Paul Lynde. Since you are probably far more familiar with the individual episodes, and I see a lot of names there, what are your 3 most memorable guest stars and episodes of the show?
Well, Henry Gibson as Rongo Starr was so popular, he was brought back a second time.
And that's the same fellow who a few years later ran for president on Laugh-In, right? Wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, let me think. I know he was on Laugh-In.
Yeah.
I think he was the poet on Laugh-In.
Okay.
Actually, but he was very popular. And you mentioned Paul Lynde. He would certainly be there as the singing Mountie, as one of my favorites. Yeah. And probably a third. Goodness, there's so many great guest stars on here. But if I have to narrow it down to 3, Bernard Fox is the Phantom Major in an early first season episode. By a nose over Milton Berle as Wise Al would be my third choice, just because the Phantom Major is so pompous, and it's quite a delight watching them, make the Phantom Major disappear at the end of that one.
So let me just ask then. Do you know any background stories? How did they get the ideas for the show? Did they say, well, Paul Lynde is available, let's make him a singing Mountie? I mean, I'm assuming some of these stars were well known enough in the day that some of the roles were written for them. Was that the case usually?
I know of at least two cases where they really wanted the actor on the show. Phil Harris and Forrest Tucker were longtime friends. Forrest Tucker actually said Phil Harris was his hero when he was growing up and his inspiration to get into show business. So the role of the 147-year-old Flaming Arrow was written with Phil Harris in mind for it. And I do know that probably with a little nudging from ABC, Milton Berle was cast as Wise Owl for the second season. Milton Berle was making his great comeback at that time with his variety show coming back on Friday nights that year. So ABC probably nudged him a little bit in that direction. That episode also turned out very well.
And so let's just talk then. We talked about why the show ended. What was its afterlife in syndication? Because I think that there are two DVDs for both seasons. I remember in the 70s, I guess it ran on local syndication around the country. Did it ever, I know, like, for example, the Monkees famously had 25 years later, they had a revival because I think MTV played the Monkees for a while, for a couple of years. What was the afterlife of the show of F Troop?
Well, it remained very popular in syndication despite only having 65 episodes. Excuse me, a little raspy there. There was... Forrest Tucker tried to revive it a number of times before that. In fact, after it was canceled, he was looking into alternate film locations to produce first-run syndication episodes. And he was thwarted when Warner Brothers immediately sold it into syndication. They just couldn't, they couldn't get any interest in competing with the reruns, which cost far less than producing new ones would have. So he tried to revive it a number of times after that in TV movie form. And by the 1980s, when the nostalgia craze for 60s, there was a script commissioned in 1985, and they were going to have a full-fledged reunion. And unfortunately, Tucker was diagnosed with lung and throat cancer. And he died in 1986, so the reunion really couldn't take place without him, and it was shelved. But the show just continued to live on in local syndication. It got a big boost in 1991 when Nick at Night picked it up. And they were originally, it seems like everyone who does pick it up, they intend to run it. Nick at Night was going to run it once or twice a week on weekends. And it became so popular that they started running it 5 nights a week and kept these 65 episodes on for 5 years. So there was a big boost there. TV Land aired it for a time after that. MeTV picked it up in 2013, kept it on for 3 full years, and now Circle has had it recently. I'm pretty sure Circle will be putting it back on at some point. They rotate their shows quite a bit.
So we talked a bit about Ken Berry's post F Troop career. Melody Patterson, from what I read, basically did a few other guest starring episodes, and then she just gave up acting. Is that correct?
She got married to James MacArthur of Hawaii Five-0 fame.
Yeah, Dano.
Not too long after that. And yeah, and that pretty much from there, it was just occasional roles. She did pop up as late as a movie in 1991 called The Immortalizer. Still very attractive at that time. And did personal appearances up until she passed away in 2015. But yeah, I think marriage and family became more important to her, and that wasn't uncommon for a young actress in those days.
So, Forrest Tucker, I mentioned that he was on Dusty's Trail, which he played the head of a wagon train going, I guess, the Oregon Trail, and Bob Denver was the comic lead. There was sort of a mishmash of Gilligan's Island and F Troop in a sense.
Mhm.
Um, but after, I mean, was that after he tried and failed to get F Troop on the air? Was that something that came out of it? Dusty's Trail came out of his attempts to get F Troop back.
Um, I don't think so. I think he remained in demand as an actor. He went right back to doing what he was doing before it. Got had good roles in Chisholm and Vaquero on the big screen. And the night they raided Minsky's right after F Troop, he continued to play the music man on stage every so often, and was a very frequently cast guest star on TV in addition to doing dinner theater. Um, and it just, the dream of bringing F Troop back was something that just never fully left, and he would just every so often see if there was interest in doing a reunion movie.
Mm.
But in the 70s, they had not, we just weren't quite full circle on 60s nostalgia just yet. It took until the 80s to, have some full-fledged interest in that. It didn't hurt, certainly, that Andy Griffith did a very popular reunion movie around that time. There was a movie called High School USA, which reunited a lot of 60s icons, like the recently departed Dwayne Hickman and Angela Cartwright and Bob Denver, and got really good ratings when it aired.
And then there were like three Gilligan's movies.
Yes, three Gilligan's movies before that. So it was. It's a shame when he finally got some good interest in doing an F Troop reunion movie. Unfortunately, he became ill.
Yeah, and for me, the biggest loss, I think, had the show gone on a few years. I mean, I think Larry Stark was such a great comic talent. After that in the '70s, I remember he was on an episode of All in the Family where he played a guy urging Archie to cheat on Edith. He had the thing, like I mentioned, the Ghostbusters Saturday Morning Kids thing, and then I guess he just went back to stand up.
He continued to do stand up. He, in the mid 70s, he had a very lucrative deal in Vegas for a time, and he was always being sought after for guest starring roles. Some of the more memorable ones, comedically, right after F Troop, were on I Dream of Jeannie, where he played a NASA monkey in human form,
Yeah.
And then on Gomer Pyle as a Latin American general. And he would also get dramatic roles. He's quite good in Columbo, for example, and in a couple episodes of Mannix. For the next 20 years, he was basically doing stand-up and getting cast a lot, and then he turned more to doing stage work. And actually, as recently as 2005, was on Broadway in Sly Fox for a time. So he's pretty much retired now. I mean, he's 99. I think he's probably wants to relax, but for the next 35 or so years after F Troop, he never really had a problem finding work, whether it was on stage or as a guest star somewhere.
So I said that I will link to the Horn section. I end my movie features on why this film was great by asking the question, which I'm going to ask to you is, why do you think that F-Troop is a great television show, and why should people all these years later watch it?
Well, we've touched on a lot of that. I think it was slightly ahead of its time. I think that it's still fresh all these years later, and I touch on this in some of the reviews. And in some ways, you can look at it with a much different eye. On the surface, you might not think this ages well. On the surface, you see some stereotypes, but it's more of a sly commentary on those stereotypes the more you dig into it. And it's just really funny with a absolutely timeless combination of some very talented people in front of the camera, particularly the Tucker Storch Berry combo.
Yeah. So, Hal, thanks for spending a couple hours speaking about this great show. And as I said, I'll link to your website. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Dan.